Assalamualaikum and a very good morning. We are from group 3. Today we would like to presenting about the topic 1 which is equilibrium of force. My name is Muhammad Amir Husni bin Muhammad Fazil. I will be presenting about the additional theory and question.
So my name is Muhammad Akmal bin Abdul Rabi. I will presenting about result and calculation.
My name is Muhammad Haziddin Arif and I will present about discussion.
Hi, my name is Muhammad Anwar Arashidi. I will present about conclusion and discussion.
My name is Muhammad Ashraf bin Yusuf, and I will be presenting the observation of the experiment.
For the additional theory, as we know, force are vectors, which is force has magnitude and direction that related to exist in Cartesian. So as we know, for the force they have Fx and Fy. So to calculate the Fx, we can use formula Fx equal Fx cos theta and Fy sin theta. To find the resultant force, we can use formula force Fx plus force x plus force y, and to find the direction we can use formula theta equal tan negative tan Fy divided by Fx. Force also is under equilibrium force, which is no acceleration takes the place. The force exerted on each particle and therefore on the body are either is internal or external to the body. For the external force is one exerted on a particle. For the internal force is one exerted by one particle on another in the same body. From this experiment, we use the parallelogram law, which is they have several force operate on a point. The sum can be obtained under vector algebra law. The total force we can find by using formula F1 plus F2, and also we know F1 and F2 have a Fx and Fy function.
So this is the experimental and calculated result. So as we can see from the graph that the experimental result is directly proportional between force and weight. Also for the calculated result, next slide. The calculated result also, the graph is also directly proportional between force and weight. That's all for me.
Okay, based on what we can observe is the table of result between experimental and calculated value. As we can see, the difference between both value is off. Because of happened during the experiment. As we can see, as the load W increase, the angle of the side attached to the load increase also. This is because the weight and angle are directly proportional at each other. The balance between force theorem is achieved when the load on one side is greater than the other load.
So for the calculation, the first step is from the result that we get from the observation, we need to draw the triangle of force. So when we draw the triangle of force, we need to assume the direction correct. Correct. So for the second is after we draw the triangle of force, we continue with the solve for the cosine law, which is the formula of cosine law is cos theta first equal to b squared plus c squared minus a squared divided by 2 multiplied by bc. So from this we can determine for the theta 1. So after the angle of theta 1 we get, we continue calculate for the theta 2 with the y component of equilibrium, which is Fy equal to 0. So the calculation, the the formula that we need to use is Fy equal to 0 equal to F weight 1 cos theta 1 plus weight 2 cos theta 2 minus weight 3 equal to 0. So we can see from the result that we can determine for the theta 2. So after we get the theta 1 and theta 2, we continue to the parallel diagram. So for the parallel diagram, we need to use the ratio which is 1 cm equal to 1 Newton. So we draw the accurate measure of angle and the weight that we get. So with that we can get the result correctly. That's all for me.
Okay, for discussion of the experiment equilibrium of forces, as we look at the graph, the values of sine theta 2 over sine theta 1 is increasingly linearly from first point to the fifth point, and the gradient of the experimental result is 0.952, and the slope is represented for the resultant force. For the calculated value, the graph shows that the value of sine theta 2 over sine theta 1 is increasingly as the weight 1 over weight 2 increase, and the gradient of calculated result state is 1, and also the slope represent the resultant force. So as we know that the parallelogram diagrams obtain influence by the values of weight 2 plus the length of OB, and the angle between the resultant force with OA increase as the values of weight 2 increase. The resultant force of the vectors F1 and F2 represented by the length of OC. The scale used to draw the parallelogram is 1 cm equals to 1 Newton. Hence, the resultant force for all the diagrams is 2.5 Newton, as the length of OC in all diagrams are 2.5 centimeter.
Okay, for the discussion about the experimental and the calculated value, when the weight 2 is equal to 2.0 Newton, the value of angle for theta 1 and sine theta 2 for both experimental and calculated result are unchanged. So it is same for both experiment, for both result. And then for the values of sin theta 1 and sin theta 2 and sin for sin theta 2 and sin theta 1, the differences are between 0.01 and 0.04. It means between the experimental and calculated, there is a slightly different in the value. And then the differences of angle of theta 1 and theta 2 between these two results are not obvious because the differences are only between 1 degree to 3 degree only. And then the ratio of the weight 1, weight 2 equal to F1, F2 for both experimental and calculated result are unvaried for all values of WK.
Next, for the question 1, explain the parallelogram methods to find the resultant of two parallel force. First of all, we need to draw the first vector according to the scale in the given directions. Next, join the second vector's tail with the head of the first vector drawn according to the given scale and in the defined direction. To draw the resultant vector, join the tail of the first vector with second vector's head and put the arrowhead. To determine the magnitude, measure the length of the resultant r, and to find out the direction, measure the angle of the resultant with the x-axis. To find the resultant r, we assume that 1 cm equal 1 Newton. So we need to find the length of r and convert it into Newton. So for the next question, what are the alternative methods that can be used to analyze the addition of two forces? the first method is the trigonometry method. So the sinus features refers to the proportion of the acute angle of the side in relation to the angle of the hypotenuse in terms of the volume. Next, the cosine equation calculates the acute angle as the ratio of the length of the side perpendicular to the angle to the length of the hypotenuse. Next, the tangent equation compares the measurement of an angle to the ratio of the length of the side to the angle of the side. So as we can see the pictures here, for the cosine is the x-axis, and for the sine which is at the y-axis, and for the tangential is length of hypotenuse. Next, the second step is we use the Pythagorean methods. The Pythagorean method theorem is a practical way of evaluating the outcome of the addition of two and only two vectors to the right angle. The approach should not be used to add more than two vectors or to add vectors not 90 degrees. The Pythagorean theorem is a mathematical equation that compares the sides of right triangle to the length of the right triangle hypotenuse. So as we can see the picture here, uh, here's are the formula for calculate the hypotenuse, which is we can use the formula a squared plus b squared equal to c squared. To find the hypotenuse, we can rewrite the formula by using a squared plus b squared square root.
Okay. For conclusion, for this experiment, to conclude about this whole experiment, equilibrium is when all the forces acting on a body are balanced. It means the values of force that acting on a body is balanced. And then the calculations that involved in this experiment, uh, involving the trigonometric function, it is used to determine every component of forces. And then from this experiment also, student can understand how to calculate forces of equilibrium using the balanced force method. It is like the triangle of forces and the parallelogram of forces. Okay, for the result obtained in this experiment, we can conclude that there is a slightly difference on values obtained between the experimental and calculation values. Um, We also understand that during the experiment, we also encounter the issues such as incompatible values. To prevent those incompatible values occur because of the random error. Okay, to prevent the random error in the next experiment, to make the experiment more reliable and more better, it is advisable to collect more data and then averaging the data, so the number of findings can also be beneficial. And then we also recognize that knowing the features of an equilibrium state compared to conducting the experiment is critical in determining whether or not things are unusual. So it means that we might get more precise data when we calculate using those formula and all those calculation. But here we can conclude that there is a slightly different in the values for the experimental result for such that error occur.
Okay, that's all from us. Thank you.